do have the option of enabling and creating a backup right within the portal. Now it's telling me about something called a recovery services vault, and it's offering me to create a new one. And you'll notice that it's selected the enhanced backup as the default, which allows multiple backups per day, up to 30 days of retention. It supports this trusted VM, which is this is what this is. It also supports ultra and premium SSD disks. Okay, so standard does not have those types of supports and talks about a policy. So this policy that it's offering me to create is what's going to dictate how often this gets backed up. So you'll see that it's offering me a backup policy where for every 4 hours, it's going to run starting at 8 a.m., noon, 4 p.m., 8 p.m., etc. Okay, and it's going to retain 7 days of instant recovery. So I'm going to be able to pull out to a specific point in time for up to 7 days. And it's hard-coded here for 30 days of retention for the daily backup. Now, if I chosen a weekly backup or a monthly backup, I could set those as separate retentions. Now, if I just said OK and said enable backup, then we would set up this backup in an automated fashion. But in this video, I want to talk about manual backups. So I'm going to X out of here and go to the dashboard into my resource. I'll go to the dashboard. And first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create the recovery services vault myself. So I'm going to search for recovery. And backup and site recovery is the offer. And so we're going to create a recovery services vault. Now, recovery services vault is just a storage account that has certain rules applied to it because it's specifically for backups. I'm going to put this into my VM resource group, and I'm going to call this my new recovery services vault. And for convenience, I'm going to keep it in the same region as the VM. Although, if we're going to do this in the recovery aspect, you'd want this to be in a separate region. But for backups, let's keep it in the same region. How often do we want this to be redundant? Well, it's going to be, in this demo, locally redundant. So as you know, under storage, it keeps copies locally versus zone redundant or geo redundant, and you're going to pay more for that. Next up, encryption. I'll just leave it as a Microsoft managed key. Now, if I wanted this backup to never be changed or deleted, then that would be immutability. I'm not going to touch that. I'm not going to change the networking, and we're just going to say review and create. So this will go off and create a storage account for my backups, and we'll let that run. All right, the recovery services vault seems to have created. So right now this is an empty recovery services vault, and it's not tied to any specific virtual machine or any specific data job. So what I want to do at this point is I can set up the backup job from within the recovery services vault. So I go under backup. What is your workload? Well, my workload is running in Azure. We're going to talk about on-premises backups in a second, but we're talking about Azure backups, and I want to back up a virtual machine. You can see that I can back up a file share, SQL database, and the SAP workloads. But in this case, we're backing up a virtual machine. And I'll say backup. And now I'm being given a very similar setup to what we could have been creating either the time we created the virtual machine or in the backup plane of the VM. I have the choice between enhanced and standard. I'm going to choose enhanced because this is a trusted launch VM, and if I try to choose standard, it might not work. And as you can see, we have the backup policy, and it's the one we saw earlier, which is an hourly backup starting at 8 a.m. every 4 hours, and it keeps 30 days for retention for the backup, as well as instant recovery for 7 days. And I will say OK. And it puts in text here exactly what we saw. And now I can add which virtual machine I want to add this policy to. This is the machine that I was just looking at. So as you can see, you can sort of manage if you have a single backup policy or maybe production policy and a development policy, you can come into your recovery services vault and pick which VMs are covered by which policy and through this. So now I can say enable backup, and I'm going to click it. So now it's setting up the policy, and it's going to schedule this backup. Now it doesn't do the backup right away, but we'll see that in a second when it's complete. All right, so the backup policy has been deployed. And if I go into the recovery services vault and I choose the backup tab, we're going to see none of the backups have run yet, but we do have one item under backup items, and we can also see it here under protected items, one virtual machine. When I go into it, the backup pre-check says passed, but we have not yet run the initial backup. So this is scheduled for, if you recall, every 4 hours. So at 8 p.m. Today will be the next time that the backup is scheduled to run. So in this video, we saw that there's at least 2 or 3 different ways we can schedule a backup. And we have a backup scheduled for our virtual machine in a brand new recovery services vault. All right, so we've seen that we've got our virtual machine scheduled to be backed up. And again, it probably runs at 8 p.m. will be the next time that this runs. I can go into the backed up items and see the details. And this is just going to give me an overview that the pre-check has passed, but it hasn't run the initial backup. And I could see if there were restore points when the last time it ran, if I want to recover to that. So what we can do is called a on-demand or ad hoc or manual backup. We can say backup now, right from within this details of the backup item. And I can define how long I want this backup to be retained. So that's a manual. Let's say I want to do it for just a week. And now it's going to go and trigger the backup instead of waiting for it. So anytime let's say you're about to make a change to the server and you're like, well, let's make a backup just before we make this major change. That'll make it easier to recover. Then you can go and manually trigger a backup, this method. Now, once you've kicked off the backup, this can take some time. So it's not going to take 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 15 minutes. It's going to take some time to get the backup going. Even a small VM could take 20 minutes to an hour, depending on the size. So I actually don't have to sit here and just stare at the screen waiting for it to complete. There is such a thing as a job and a monitor. So if I go back to the recovery services of Vault itself, and I can go under monitoring, I can see there's a item called backup jobs. And so I can see my initial configuration took place at this date and time, and now the triggering of the backup, which we did manually, has kicked off here. So this is a way of checking out on jobs that are in progress. Of course, I can say view details, and we can see, the task that it's doing, how long it's taking, etc. Now, the taking of the snapshot is usually pretty quick. Transferring that data to the Vault is what usually takes some time, so we can wait for that. Now, another thing we can do while we're waiting, the virtual machine is still running, and hopefully this backup is not so disruptive to the virtual machine. I mean, obviously it can be, but we can take a look at the VM and to see how it's going, right? So we're seeing CPU utilization, VM availability. Well, availability is positive. CPU utilization is running around 47%. We got obviously some bytes that are happening. So there is some activity on the server itself, as you would expect during a backup. We see it took around 8 minutes for the backup to be done, but another 8 minutes at least for the data to be transferred to the Vault. And as expected, it took about half an hour, 27 minutes to do the backup and transfer the data to the Vault. And so that's how you do a manual on-demand backup. So let's assume that you've got a virtual machine and you've got a backup running and it's doing its every 4 hours backup. But at some point you want to recover a file. You don't need to restore the entire VM. You just want one important file. How do we handle file recovery? If we were having to restore the entire server just to get back to that one file, that's a bit of an overkill, excessive, and time consuming. So what we're going to do is do something called file recovery. I'm in the virtual machine here. I'm going to go under backup, which is where the backup exists. And you'll see that my last backup status is successful, and I do have a applications consistent backup in the recovery points. Up at the top, it says file recovery, and I'm going to click it. So before I do that, I have to pick from which backup I want to recover that file. So I only have the one because we just did a manual backup, and so I'm going to click this one initial backup. Now you'll notice something strange. It does not giving us a list of files and asking us to pick which file. It's giving us an executable at which we can download. Now this executable mounts the disks from the selected recovery point as a local drive on the machine. And then these drives remain mounted for 12 hours. So if I want to get access to the backup, I have to basically download an executable and execute it, and that will mount that backup as a local drive that I can then access, and it requires a password to get access to. When I'm done with it, I can unmount the disk and close the connection. So I'm going to click Download Executable. It says generating script and password, and you require the password to run the script. All right, I've got the file and the password. So I downloaded the executable, I copied the password, I ran an administrator window on my local machine here, executed the program, and it kicked off a PowerShell script, and we can read here that it has connected to a iSCSI over the internet and has restored my volumes to the D drive on my local. And so this is the operating system disk for the virtual machine that we just backed up. Now I don't have any, I didn't use the computer, so I don't have anything I can really dig into, but this is the computer that we backed up, and if there was files here that I needed to access, I could. Of course, it's telling me when I'm done with it that I can just click unmount, and then it will no longer grant access to this as a backup. So let's imagine the worst happens and something's gone wrong with our VM. We've been infected with a virus, or we did some changes to it and we want to roll back, or some kind of critical error. This is when we might want to use the restore VM option. Now, this function isn't just about disasters. It's also a great way to do a copy of a VM. So you can do a backup and a restore, and that'll do a second VM identical to the first. So if you want to test something and you take a backup of the production server and you restore it to development, and then you can certainly do your tests, and then you've got a brand new virtual machine to do your tests against. So I'm going to go to my Recovery Services Vault, into my backed up items, and we're going to drill down into the backed up item and save view details. And just like we saw the file recovery here, we have a restore VM option. So I'm going to click restore VM. Now, just like with recovering the file, we have to choose a restore point. And I'm going to pick this successful restore point. And you'll notice that we have two main options for the restoration. One is to create a new VM, and the other is to replace the existing VM. So for this demo, I'm just going to create a new VM. This is going to be like having a second VM, which is a copy of the first. So I put create new. So I have to give it a name. So I'm going to call this a VM copy. Call it whatever you want. And I'm going to keep it in the same resource group and the same subscription as the existing one. Now you can change that. You can change the different region and things like that. But let's keep it the same. And I'm even going to keep it onto the same virtual network. And we'll just have a second VM running on the same VNet. Now, in terms of the staging location, we need a storage account where the backup is going to be restored into a temporary spot. Now, you'll notice I don't have a storage account. I'm going to have to stop and create that. So open a new tab on my browser, and I'm going over to create a storage account. Same region as the restore, the Recovery Services Vault. And I'm making it locally redundant. And I'm going to leave all of the defaults here. Public network access is all fine. Now, I don't think I need to have all the soft delete stuff for it's just a temporary storage account that I'll delete. Encryption, tags, and I'm going to create. Obviously, if you have access to a storage account that you can use for temporary purposes, you don't need to do this step, of course. So I'm going to go back and start over because there's no refresh button. I'm going to pick my backup, the original one. Create new, VM copy, same resource group, same virtual network. And this time I'm going to put it into this storage account that I created. So now I can click the restore button, and this is going to kick off a job. And this job is going to copy data from the vault to that staging location. It's going to create new managed disks and a new virtual machine resource, and then it will attach the disks and boot up. And so we're getting this restore going, and in a few minutes, we're going to have a virtual machine, which is a backup restored copy of that backup we did a few hours ago. Now I can monitor this just like I can with a backup job. If I go into the Recovery Services Vault and I go under backup jobs, you can see that I have a restore in progress. And it's even given me a percentage complete, so we can wait for that restore to run. And if we scroll a little bit, we can see that there's the two tasks, transferring the data and creating a restored virtual machine. So we can see that it took about 2 minutes for the restore to say completed and the job progress to say 100%. So if I go back to my dashboard into my resource group, then I should have a VM copy, and I do, which is a running virtual machine, which is a copy of the backup that we did. Now from there, I can log into this machine, I can connect into it, I can test my tests if I needed to do some sort of test that I didn't want to affect production, I can recover data, and then when I'm done, I can delete the VM, or I can change my domain name registration to point to this instead of the other one, or whatever I need to do once I have this VM running. So performing a VM restore, a full VM restore, is a powerful option for both disaster recovery and also for testing. Now, I briefly mentioned that the backup service does not only deal in Azure workloads. So if we go into the Recovery Services Vault, under Getting Started Backup, we saw the selection includes Azure Stack, which is an on-premises cloud, and Azure Stack Hub, as well as on-premises itself. And so choosing on-premises gives us these 8 options. Now, files and folders, again, very selective backup. It can run as an application on the server that's being backed up. A couple of different virtual machine options, the Windows Hyper-V, as well as the VMware product, which Azure integrates into very well as a partner. You can do an on-premises SQL Server backup. You can do a SharePoint server, an Exchange server. You can back up the system state, or you can do what is called bare metal, which takes the entire server right down to the operating system to back that up. And so you have a number of options. Each of these options has slightly different instructions. So if I say files and folders and I say prepare infrastructure, then I'm taken to their recommendation, which is the Recovery Services Agent. Now, the Recovery Services Agent is a download for Windows Server or Windows Client, where you can download this application, install it onto your machine. You'll need to get credentials so that your machine can register to the Recovery Services Vault. The credentials expire after 10 days in order to set this up. And then you schedule the backup, and you can basically, just as we did with the VMs, monitor the backup on the jobs page. You can even receive notifications when backups don't work in terms of notifications alerts. So we can see here, files and folders are dealt with one way. If I don't do that and I instead choose the Hyper-V virtual machine, then we're not given the agent, we're given a backup server. So this needs to be a machine that doesn't have to be dedicated to it, but you have to have a machine other than the machine being backed up, of course. And that's called MABS, or Microsoft Azure Backup Server. It also requires the credentials, and then you're going to use the MABS UI to configure the backup to which virtual machines in Hyper-V you're going to be backing up. We can see a VMware also uses MABS. You do need to, I guess you have the option of using System Center for some of these backups. Now, different agents are going to require different sets of instructions. You can see SQL Server. If we go down to the bare metal option, this is also MABS. Again, this is an external server that runs outside of the machine that's being backed up. And so this MABS has replaced a couple of different backup products that previously existed. And so you can then configure all of your backups in here. We also notice have the option of having more than one thing selected at a time. And I guess MABS is the default option when you've got to do lots of different types of backups. So as you can see, on-premises does work. Keep in mind for the files and folders one, you could even run this on a AWS EC2 instance or Google Cloud server. Anywhere where you can install this agent on a Windows server, you can actually get a backup into the Azure Recovery Services Vault. So over the years, Microsoft has standardized diagnostics across Azure, whether it's virtual machines, storage accounts, or in our case, Recovery Services Vaults. We can track operations and metrics by sending them to a Log Analytics workspace. Once the data is in Log Analytics, we can analyze it using Azure Monitor or specialized workbooks, often called backup reports. But to get these reports, we first have to turn on the data flow. So I'm in my Recovery Services Vault, and I'm going to scroll down under the Manage section, and there's a blade called Backup Reports. Now, historically, this has been the job of something like Power BI, but again, this has all been centralized in Log Analytics. Now, you'll see here that there is no data because we haven't turned on diagnostics. So we have to go under Monitoring, under Diagnostic Settings, and I don't have any diagnostics configured, but you can see all of the data that we can pull out of this diagnostics. So I'm going to click Add Diagnostic Setting. I have to give it a name, and so I'm going to call this Backup Logs. Now, if we look at the categories, we have lots of them, and we have Azure Backup related logs and Azure Site Recovery related logs. Now, if I try to select everything, all the logs, and send it to the workspace, Azure might complain because that's just a lot of data, and there's some schema that is overlapping and things like that. So let's be very specific in terms of what data we want to store. So since we're focusing on backup right now, let's choose the core Azure Backup category, as well as the backup job data and backup alerts. All right, so that's going to give us a core set. And I'll make sure that none of the site recovery stuff is in there right now. So I'm going to send this to a Log Analytics workspace. And I already have a subscription in a workspace. As you can see in the warning, it wants us to do separate workspaces for our separate diagnostics for Azure Backup and Azure Site Recovery events so that there's no overlap. All right, so we're just going to store these things. Now, if you want to, you can store this in a storage account additionally or instead of. That's totally up to you. Now, I'm also going to collect metrics. I'll go to the bottom and say all metrics. And now I can click save. So now that we have set up some settings for diagnostics, the next time we do a backup, those diagnostics data is going to be stored in our log analytics workspace. It's not going to be able to go back, obviously, to the one that we previously did, but it's going to be able to grab data from every backup that happens every 4 hours as we currently have set up. So in order to test this, I can certainly go to the backup again, to the virtual machine, view details, and say backup now. So we can do a second manual backup. Again, that's going to take another half an hour, but that's going to generate the data that's going to go into our reports. So this usually takes a little while, and then we can examine the reports from that. So we're in the Recovery Services Vault, we're into the backup jobs, and we can see that our second backup completed. So let's compare the two. It took about the same amount of time, 27, 28 minutes. The first backup, we can see, was 11.8 gigabytes roughly, and the second backup was only 350 megabytes, which is comparatively smaller. That is because Azure Backup is incremental. So after the first full backup, it only transfers changes. Now let's look at the reporting side. If we go into Backup Reports, we select the Log Analytics workspace that we were working with, we're going to see that there's really nothing. That's because there's often a latency. So we just ran the backup, and the backup reports could be not run until tomorrow. So we are not getting real-time information under backup reports here. So if I go to the Summary tab, again, it hasn't yet been run. So in order to get more data, we're going to have to switch over to a logs view. To do that, I'm going to go into Azure Monitor, and I'm going to go into logs. And once I close the video, I can narrow the scope of the logs into the Recovery Services Vault itself. So I'm going to go into the subscription, the resource group, and I'm going to choose the Recovery Services Vault as my scope. And click Apply. Now I'm going to shrink the menu here, and I'm going to say Select a Table. And we can see 3 tables on the left side, right? So we have the Azure Diagnostics, we have Azure Activity, and we have the Backup Jobs table. Now, the language of this Azure Logs is called KQL, or Kusto Query Language. And so I'm going to click on the Azure Backup Jobs table, and by default, it runs and shows me all of the entries. I can also switch over to KQL mode if I want to write this as a query, and I'm familiar with KQL and can be more complicated with that. So what we have here is 2 entries in the backup jobs, and we can see the data transferred. One of these entries is the backup, and one of these entries is the restore. I can switch over to KQL mode, and we can see, I'll zoom in a little bit, we can see that it's just got the table name. If I want to be more specific, I can say summarize jobs by status, and I'll run that. And that shows me that there are 2 completed jobs in this, or however many jobs that ran. Now, if you're not sure what else kind of information you can get from this, there's this link at the top that says Queries Hub. And we are, again, very specific to the Recovery Services Vault type that we're in. And we can see failed jobs. We can see the trend for cloud storage consumed and things like that. Get information on jobs, successful jobs, failed jobs, etc. And even look at the different types of items that have been backed up by Vault and by backup item. So there are pre-built queries that we can look through to get inspiration for what kind of reports we want to get from this data. Now, Azure's released a new security feature called the Soft Delete for Recovery Services Vaults. If you're not familiar with the term, a soft delete is when you go and delete something, but it doesn't actually get deleted right away. There is a delay between the time that you initiate the delete process and when it gets actually deleted. This allows you to change your mind. Now, the reason this is a security feature is because if somebody was to hack into your account and to delete your virtual machines, they would then also maybe want to delete your backups, and that would really get you in trouble. So them not being able to affect your backups because you can restore within a 14-day period is a security feature. Now, this is enabled by default on brand new Recovery Services Vaults. If you have an older Recovery Services Vault, you can turn this on. Now, in Azure, the soft delete process takes 14 full days. So if you initiate a delete, there is a 14-day period where it's still available for you. That means you can undelete it. And once you undelete it, that file is available to recover from, things like that. It becomes back to a normal state. On the 15th day, if you have not undeleted the file, it gets auto-deleted. Now, that's explained. This graph is from Microsoft website. Pretty much that's what's being explained here is after 15 days and no user action is required and the data gets permanently deleted. And if you stop that undelete within 14 days, then you can actually resume the backup jobs and get your virtual machine going again, or you can restore from that backup, etc. Now, when the worst case happens and a whole entire region was to be unavailable, let's say the internet was knocked off to the US East region, what do you do? So one option is to have a disaster recovery plan in place and to have a backup set of machines and a backup environment ready to go. In Azure, this is using the tool called Azure Site Recovery, or ASR. So the idea here is that we're going to take our environment that we have, let's say in this case, in East US. We have a couple of virtual machines in an availability set on a network that run on a couple of disks. Of course, virtual machines require disks. And so you're going to want to have ready to go in a different environment that same setup. Now, that doesn't mean that it's a hot swap where you have these machines running and they're on, you're being charged for them, but they're not being used. This is a case of where you have it ready to go, but as you can see in this diagram, they're not running and they're not ready to go. What ends up happening is when this environment is not available, then Azure is going to deploy these machines in a ready state and with all of your data backed up and in the exact same configuration. And all you need to do is just direct the traffic to that new environment. So this is sort of a, not a hot swap, but a cold swap. And it could take, realistically, it could take 10 or 15 minutes for an environment to be ready, not only creating the virtual machines, but ensuring that they are in a ready to go state in terms of the code that needs to be on there and things like that. So the whole startup instantiation process. So it could be a good 10 minutes before your environment is ready to go, but that is obviously better than being down for hours. So that is the tool called Azure Site Recovery. So I got this virtual machine that I've created, and let's show how to create this disaster recovery setup. I'm in the portal under the virtual machine, and under the backup and disaster recovery menu, there's this disaster recovery setting. Now, when I go into it, it says, welcome to Azure Site Recovery. And since I did not deploy this virtual machine into an availability zone, then I don't have the availability zone recovery option available to me. You'll see that it's chosen a region for me to have my new environment. Obviously, the farther away the region is, you are going to have increased charges when it comes to the data transfer between continents here. And this might be a slower connection, so there might be some lag. So it's generally a better idea to choose a region that is not too far from your current region. Now, there is also this concept of region pairs, where for every region in Azure, there is one region that has the highest speed connection. I believe that North Europe and West Europe are region pairs. And so this is going to be the cheapest and quickest connectivity between these two regions. And there shouldn't really be any event that affects the Northern Europe data centers that also affects West Europe data centers. So let's choose that. Now, again, it's up to you. You could choose US, you could choose farther off into Europe, into Poland, for instance. That's totally up to you. Just realize there are cost and lag implications. So let's say next. And what we're going to see here is it's going to set up under the same subscription a brand new resource group, a brand new virtual network. It's understanding that I'm doing replication on a single VM. So you'll see that it's got the ability to do this against availability zones, availability sets, and VMSS. If I had a proximity placement group for my VMSS, I could choose one. A lot of this stuff is going to get created, just not the virtual machines being instantiated. I could choose capacity reservation if I had any. Now we can see here that it's also going to create the storage account, and it's going to do a replication between the storage accounts. So from the region in Northern Europe where my machine currently exists, it's going to use a recovery services vault to do backups, and it's going to make sure that the data is ready to go into the new region. So now I can say review, and it's showing me what's going to happen, the target and the source, basically storage, replication, etc. And I can say start. So as you can see, it's actually quite straightforward, quite simple to set up this emergency recovery. It's going to take some time, obviously, to set these things all in place. But it's quite simple using the portal to get this going. And if there was, like I said, this rare disaster, it hasn't happened in at least a year, I think, maybe more, where a region is not available. If that does happen, then I would have another environment in a different region that I could start up, and it would have all of the data backups and everything ready to go. So like many things when it comes to Azure, we're going to have to let it run for a little bit. We can see that the notifications are still in progress, that there's still this enabling replication job that's been running. If I go under disaster recovery, after a few minutes, it turns into this dashboard. And you can see the status says replication in progress. I can even click it. And I can see that it's done some things, and now it's starting the initial replication. So we do have to wait for the virtual machine to be duplicated into the recovery services vault before we can test the failover. So I'm going to pause the video, and when we come back, hopefully that'll all be done. So that actually took a little while to complete, but now that it is complete, we can refresh this page. We can see that the status is protected, and we've never tested the failover. So in this video, I do want to click the test failover button. Now, incidentally, if we no longer need the source environment, let's say we're copying the environment from one region to the other, then we want to do the final failover, which is to essentially stop the replication and to make the destination target environment its own environment. So, but in this case, we're going to test failover. So now it's going to start this process. So we have our original virtual machine in Northern Europe. We have the ASR that was set up to point to West Europe. We can see that the last processed recovery time is from this time of the day. And we can choose a virtual network. It says it's recommended the network selected for test and final are different. Well, in this case, I'm not going to do the final, so we'll just say test. So you can see it's starting the task. So we've now moved into initializing test failover. We can see this as a job. So we can see that it was able to get the virtual machine running within around 2 minutes. If we refresh. So we now are supposed to go and check it to make sure that it did run. So we can see that the virtual machine in the ASR sense in Western Europe is running. And that did get created just a few minutes ago. So we could obviously log into the machine, use it, make sure that it's successfully a complete copy of what was running in Northern Europe. So let's go back to the original. So you'll see that the test failover has been completed. To delete the virtual machine created during the test failover, use the cleanup test failover option on the virtual machine. And so back to where we have our failover test failover, we have a cleanup task. And we can kick that off. And you can see everything was fine. And now it will go and undo the test failover. So we saw that setting up the Azure Site Recovery was quite easy. And testing it, we could do that quite straightforward as well. And when we're done, we say cleanup. If we wanted to fail over permanently, that is cut the connection between the source and the target, we would just do the failover option.